And we'll go ahead and pull up the slide deck and probably get started. A couple of things for today. This is what we expect to be perhaps our last webinar of what's been a really great series that's led to some really rich conversations. And that said, our goal is to kind of report out what we're really both proud about in terms of some of the impacts and resources built, knowing some of them have a future and some legs that'll continue to serve, hopefully, this community practice well. But that said, please, as this group has always done, use the chat box actively to ask questions while we're talking, share resources you feel like are complementary to things we're sharing, ask for where you can get more information on anything that's mentioned. We don't want this to be surely us being talking heads, but instead to really be a conversation, sharing what we've certainly had a good time doing, but also knowing where we still need to make sure we get that information out, clarify anything about how some of these resources can be used and found or shared, and where else we can plug in well. So with that, we're going to start for today. I am Dawn Thilmany with Colorado State University, and I've been fortunate to be on this project for its whole duration of over 2 years now. And you're going to be hearing from a swath of those of us who've been on this project about various resources that have been built out. But we want to start with just kind of doing some framing, because we know every webinar we've had some people both new to the project who had just heard about it, and give you some framing about what we've been trying to do with this project. That's been a cooperation between the organizations you see here. So with that, we're going to start with a video that was made for this project, and share that a little bit as people continue to flow in, and then we'll be moving on to sharing some of our resources from the project for the rest of the webinar. See you back here in a couple minutes after the video is done playing.
The COVID-19 pandemic hit all of us by surprise and lasted far longer than anyone could have imagined. Impacts on farms, food producers, market channels, and food systems infrastructure were vast and varied, requiring rapid innovation and adaptation. Faced with sold-out CSA programs and empty grocery store shelves, our food systems leaders responded with creativity, innovation, and the determination to continue feeding our communities. What's more, effects of the pandemic continue to cast a long shadow across our nation's local and regional food systems, from bottlenecks in our public school supply chains to unprecedented wait times at livestock processors. In 2020, in an effort to capture innovations and support adaptation and recovery, the United States Department of Agriculture's Agricultural Marketing Service, along with the university and organization-based partners, worked to document local and regional food systems' responses to pandemic disruptions and disseminate innovations to stakeholders across the country. Building on the insights gained and successful impacts of that project, we're now headed into a second round of our local and regional food systems recovery and resilience initiative. This project focuses on translating lessons learned during the pandemic and simultaneous social crises into an intentional and collaborative strategy for supporting recovery and fostering equitable approaches to resilience. While distinct in their focus, each component of this project is designed to inform and reinforce the others. We have 4 main focus areas. Our network of networks continues cross-agency and sector learning, collaboration, and strategic action by convening organizations, leading local and regional food systems networks, university-based researchers, and USDA staff and leadership to share urgent and emergent issues, coordinate strategies and programming, and foster cross-stakeholder communication and collaboration. Building off the lessons of 2020, our Resilience Playbook team is developing a multimedia strategy kit for food systems leaders so that we can stay ready for the next disruption. By identifying the strengths and vulnerabilities of local and regional food systems in times of crises, our playbook will support leaders in developing immediate-term, mid-term, and long-term strategies for fostering equitable and resilient food systems. The Data and Metrics Initiative is focused on fostering greater data efficiency and literacy across local and regional food systems by engaging project stakeholders in completing a gap analysis of existing data, fostering peer mentorship, and providing technical assistance. Finally, our project will continue to produce publications, technical assistance, and outreach tools, including our sector snapshots, innovation briefs, cross-sectoral webinars, and data briefs. We are committed to continuing our shared work of building a robust collaborative that weaves together the different expertise and skills of our network members, the power of transparency and mutual accountability with project outputs, and a shared vision for how we can work together to build resilient, just, sustainable, and vibrant regional food systems.
And thanks again to Lillian on our team for being that great voiceover for that video. It always makes me just happy to hear. So quickly again, because we know a lot of you have joined us a few times, I think we've shared several times that we had a lot of goals in terms of where we hope to make impacts and contributions to this community of practice that you can see here. This is the second phase of a project that's consistently been resourced and funded and supported by our partners at USDA Ag Marketing Service. And we give them great kudos for recognizing and having the vision of bringing together not just a couple of us academic partners, but more importantly, that list and set of logos of community practice leaders that have taught us so much and kept us ground truth in terms of where we truly could be impactful with this project. Let's go to the next slide. And in that vein, some of what we feel like are our most significant outcomes for this project, and we did this exact same kind of graphic at the end of the last project, is some of the outcomes and resources we believe both that have been created that we're going to share more detail on today, and that will be available even as this project starts to wrap up and as played out its purpose. What we're very proud of is that there's a website and links that you're going to hear more about today that are resources we hope serve this community practice well for the next few years and continue to be refined and updated, because we have built a community practice of people who have continued to figure out ways to collaborate and work together. So that's really what today is about, is celebrating, elevating, and making sure we clearly make known to folks where these resources lie, how they should be used, and that they're a public resource for anybody in the community of practice to use. Next slide. Just to give you a sense of beyond the to-dos, the things we created, the cultural change we wanted to have happen about from taking the time and energy to bring groups of people who all have the same mission-minded value system to want to make local and regional food systems more strong, more resilient. We also, in the background, really try to do our best to build up that social capital and those relationships and the strength of this network. And these are some of the quotes we got from those leaders from communities of practice who've been involved in this this effort and what they feel like this project has represented to them. You know, so there's some that are just simple and straightforward. They felt it was the first venue they had to really share with USDA where there were gaps in funding and where those gaps particularly affected BIPOC communities. There's others who felt like it was a really great place to not just continue to adapt their own market solutions, but to get and share and steal some of the best practices from what their colleagues in other parts of the community of practice were doing. A lot of people felt like it was the first time they felt like they had true partnerships. There were certainly people they'd seen at conferences they went to every year. This is the first time they really felt like they were jointly brainstorming solutions for the sector and getting to communicate them to the people who are supposed to be providing them service here at academic institutions with our partners at the USDA Ag Marketing Service. And so I feel like we really also, beyond those listed things we can enumerate, these quotes just as much share what some of the impacts of this project have been. Next slide. And one of the quotes that my colleague Lillian pulled out that I think speaks to this the best, I can let you all read, but again, it really gets to the sense of what I was just trying to communicate, that it's kind of made people feel less alone in the challenges. Local and regional food system work is relatively new still. It's been around a couple of decades. We all have been in our, by definition, because they're local and regional food systems, we've been in our own pockets, our own parts of the US, really trying to knock out projects and initiatives that are impactful. This is the first time I think we heard a lot of people say that this COPCO made them feel like they had a true community of practice or producer association that was like-minded and like-valued in how they wanted to move the food system together. And that's, at least to us, feels very rewarding to see these kinds of quotes. Next slide. So with that, we wanted to take time today to highlight a few of the key outcomes we hoped would have a life beyond this project. These are things you're going to hear about today that we feel like with the data and metrics platform, which we'll hear about in the Resiliency Playbook, are a resource for this community of practice, which is you all and the people you lead, to lean into and use in your work. And with the network of networks, we'll spend a little less time on that today, but that's more gets to the heart of what we just talked about, which is making people feel like there is this community practice to touch base with. Even when this project isn't running, we all just know each other better. So we'll talk a little bit about each of these things today, led by those people in the project who led those particular initiatives. And so I'll be turning over the webinar here first to the data and metrics group. And I believe we have Becca Jablonski here leading the discussion on that. So I'm going to turn it over to Becca.
Thanks so much, Dawn. Really appreciate that. And hello, everyone. Next slide, please, Libby. I just want to say I am here representing an incredible team of folks today. And so we had a really challenging goal, or a series of goals. We wanted to support and promote equity in data collection and use. We wanted to improve access to food systems related data from lots of different sources. And I'll just say that part of this is because the USDA Ag Marketing Service funded a project starting in 2014 to really help better understand what the economic impact was of local and regional food markets. And Dawn led a large team on that project. And as we were going across the country and we trained thousands of people, this is prior to COVID, what we realized is that there is a lot of data out there that people just weren't necessarily aware of. Sure that people had better access to all these different sources from lots of different places. And then the last piece is to increase use of data in programming, planning, evaluation, and decision making. So 3 really easy things. And as I said, next slide, please. Thank goodness we were able to bring together this incredible team with support from the USDA Ag Marketing Service, because without it, we would have been in real trouble. And so each one of these people just made an incredible contribution. Next slide, please. So what we ended up doing was 4 different things that we produced. The first one I'm going to talk about today is our data equity framework. And so if you want to go to the next slide, but we also complemented that with our open access data warehouse, with this food and agriculture mapper and explorer that you're going to see here, and then also with important information around stories from the field. So the data equity framework is sort of the base for everything else that we did. Right? We realized pretty quickly that we weren't able to get access to all of the data that we wanted to, right? All of the indicators that were really critical to being able to tell the story of local and regional food systems and resilience. And so what we did was we called out these challenges, and we did this really led by just some incredible folks on the team. So for example, the key data measures that are needed are not currently collected. So how do we address that? Well, we have, and you're going to see them. I'm going to give you a snapshot of the 5 different, we call them 2-pagers, but some ended up much longer than that we produced. They all talk about additional suggested measures, right? What do we sort of wish that we had? What's on our wish list? How might we change what exists currently? A second one, data that lacks context for why differences among racial groups might exist, right? And so that's why thinking about including the narratives and storytelling, right, that qualitative piece, the lived experience piece with the quantitative indicators is so important. And so, we really tried to think through each of these and not sort of pretend like they weren't here, but call them out and think about how to address them. Next slide, please. And something else I think that was really important, we all noticed and talked about, was that there's a lot of data where we label things as non-white, for example, right? But we need to have inclusion of that disaggregated data by race and ethnic group. And so I think that that hopefully we've started to call that out in a meaningful way. I mentioned that we produced these 5 two-pagers. So the first thing to note is that the way that we got these 5 different categories was based on the network of networks. And we looked at what are the local and regional food systems issues that each of our members of community practice are addressing, right? What do their missions say? And if their missions say something, what are some of the data that you would actually need to understand then what are the goals, or how would you actually know if you're addressing that and actually achieving your vision, for example? And so we ended up with these 5 different categories: labor, local food sales, business development infrastructure, community resources, nutrition security, and food access. We've also started to develop something around policy because we know that that's really important. And I encourage you to go to the website localfoodeconomics.com/data so that you can really dig into each of these. But within each of them, not only do we have some explanation for the categories, but we also include then tables that include the different indicators that we think are important within each of these. Next slide, please. The indicators themselves are then housed on a GitHub site. And so what the GitHub site does, it enables people who are maybe researchers or more savvy and used to using data to actually go and get access to the data. We pulled the data, we provide information around the code about how we actually generate certain types of indicators. So it's really ready to use. And in this sense, you could have researchers that are now doing replicable research with really easy access to those kinds of data. But we know that everybody isn't necessarily data savvy, ready to do that. And so we were really fortunate to work with Data Elevates, who were able to bring into the project to help us to create an example of how the data can be used to provide a solution to a specific problem. And in this case, the problem that we focused on were the issues that some of the USDA Ag Marketing Service grants are trying to address. So think about the LAMP program grants. And we really encourage you to go and take a look at this, at the mapping and other kinds of tools that they've created here. I think they're really useful. Next slide, please. And the hope is that this is just a start, that there's going to be many more opportunities to continue to incentivize the community that you all are a part of, and also additional stakeholders to continue to build out some of these solutions. I think one of the things I learned through this work was that when we have single mapping tools, they're often they're trying to address too many issues to really be able to be useful to a particular group that's in a local place that's trying to address a specific problem. And so the idea is that if we can develop, if now that we have the data collected and aggregated in one place, if we can develop many of these, that there'll be more and more tools out there that'll be useful to all of you in your work. So moving forward, our commitment is that we're going to continue to make these annual updates of the data in the GitHub site. And you'll also see, if you go to that website, that we are encouraging all of you to let us know, what are we missing, right? This was a first attempt with a group that worked really hard, but we know we didn't do something perfect. So please tell us, how do we continue to improve this? We also are hoping that we can continue to gather what are the challenges from each of you. Where are there places that you want to better understand how you could make use of data in your program planning and thinking about evaluation? And then we can maybe go out and help to find people to develop these solutions. And then we need you to share your stories. How are you actually making use of these data, right? How do you make it so that maybe another group would be less intimidated in thinking about using these data moving forward? So with that, I'll turn it back over to Dawn.
Thank you. As you can see, there's been a lot of time, thought, and resources put into developing that resource, and we truly hope it's something that the community practice does embrace as their own. And so you did a great job of making that invitation, Becca. The next group we want to hear from that was focused on how we could take the lessons learned from this project and the great minds thinking about it and turn it into a resource that could be used not just for something like COVID, but any of the many disruptions that can happen to a food system, quite honestly. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lillian and Annalise, who kind of led our efforts on the resiliency playbook development, to give a highlight of that part of the project.
Thanks, Dawn. Hi, I'm Lillian Brislin with Colorado State University. You may remember me from such hits as having to watch myself do the voiceover for that video when we were opening. So I'm really honored to be here talking live and in person to you all about our work with the Resilience Playbook. And my colleague, Annalise Straw, we're gonna tag team this a little bit, but know that we stand on the backs of giants with all this work, and we'll highlight that here in a second. Next slide. Great. So if you attended last month's webinar, when it was the October one, some of this will be familiar. So the idea behind our Resilience Playbook, and I have to credit Josh Stoll for really sparking this in the 1.0 of our project. During the pandemic, a lot of reflection from our partners across local and regional food systems saying, like, how many times are we going to have to relearn these lessons of how to adapt and how invaluable local and regional food systems are in times of disruption? And is there a way that we can take all of the rich learning, all of the rich real-time adaptations, pivots, collaborations that we saw when we were all in a moment of disruption during the pandemic, and codify those into something that looks like a playbook, right? Not a guide, but something where we can capture these lessons moving forward. And so moving into 2.0 of the project, our intention was to pull together those learnings in a way that would support community leaders who are in a position to mobilize and coordinate disruption or disaster response, and support them as they seek to better understand how to support and leverage, right? They're unique vulnerabilities, sure, for local regional food systems, but also incredible points of strength that can help heal and support a community. And so what we came up with, and what we're putting the final touches on, is a web-based multimedia toolkit that gives frameworks, approaches, and lots of real-world examples that will help community leaders of different subsectors, direct-to-consumer markets, farm and institution work, folks working in public health who want to think about emergency feeding in their local food communities, to help inspire short, mid, and long-term strategies for what we call equitable resilience. And all of this, the product that we are putting the finishing touches on, is based on the input and oversight and really the guidance and brilliance of our local regional food systems partners. And what we heard time and again was, it's great to have resilience as a theory, but what does it look like in action? And how can we help illustrate that in ways that'll really bring it home for folks doing the work? Next slide. So this is our team, myself, my colleague Annalise Straw, Sam Shaftel from USDA, and then our community practice coordinating organizations, our COPCO partners who really held our hands and guided us through this process, from National Farm to School Network, the Wallace Center, CSA Innovation Network, and Cooperation Works. And then we also realized that while we had amazing local regional food systems experts, we had some gaps in our team's knowledge around formal disaster and emergency response efforts. And we're so honored to be joined by colleagues from Iowa State University, Good Food Virgin Islands, National Black Food Justice Alliance, and USDA-FNS to really round out this, how we can connect the on-the-ground work of food systems with and help those intersect with more formal processes of emergency response. Next slide. So what do? We looked at, if you were here during the pandemic for these webinars, we did lots of webinars. We collected resources through our resource hub, which I think is creeping up around 300 different items of various sorts. And we looked at those as examples of resilience in action. This is the information that was seen as helpful by our LRFS partners in the times. These are the tools and information they were using. We recognized that the pandemic was one type of disruption, and we needed to look at other natural disaster and climate crisis-induced crises, as well as other sort of structural inequities. And so we did some additional research with communities across the country to understand how those types of disruptions might be distinct. From that learning and research, we developed a framework for how to approach resilience in a way that honored equity and justice, and rather than reproducing inequalities and structural injustices. And looking at all of those resources, codified those unique impacts and vulnerabilities for local food systems into a digestible framework. It's a lot to wrap your brain around. And I think the pitch that we've made through this project is what, for those of you who are fellow academics or just social science fans, what qualitative research does really well is wade into that social messiness and make sense of it. So that's what we really work to do here in the playbook. And then the playbook pulls together tools that we have built with our partners that respond directly to the challenges and opportunities that we saw during disruption. And we'll explain a little bit more of what that looks like. Next slide. So that data for us was those monthly cross-sectoral meetings that we had as part of the 1.0 of the project, where we brought together all of our co-partners to talk about what was happening. We conducted listening sessions that led to sector snapshots during the 1.0 of the project, and those were a really rich look at what's distinctly happening in different subsectors of local food systems. The case study impact innovation briefs that came out of the project to highlight phenomena that we saw happening as being really innovative and impactful. The webinars that we pulled together were really rich conversations that we wanted to share some of the incredible insights that were happening inside of our team with the rest of the food systems community. So if you've been part of this webinar series, that was the goal there. And so there was really rich learning to happen there. We've pulled from the consumer insights that Dawn and her colleagues have put together. And these webinars do, okay, yes, next slide. And through all of that, hundreds of items that Annalise and I went through and then vetted what we were seeing with our colleagues, we saw 4 categories of types of resources coming together through the hub, or types of insights being shared in conversations that really captured what we were seeing as useful. So in times of disruption, there is knowledge that needs to be shared. These are sector-specific opportunities, best practices, case studies, right? Here is knowledge. And also, when you think about the interlinking of parts of this project, this is the bread and butter of that data platform, right? We need to know who, what, where, when, how does it work, how does it function? That knowledge is shared through different types of resources, through our webinars, through policy explainers, as new policies or cooperative agreements are coming out and folks are acknowledging them. What data is out there for who, right? Helping folks find knowledge and connect with each other through those pieces. And we heard time and again and we saw that networks, connections between folks doing similar work, but also across food systems, to facilitate the sharing of knowledge, to help coordinate humans, volunteer networks, right, for food distribution, to help share resources across regions. We heard examples from our partners in Caribbean islands of literally sending boats across because they had been connected through partner networks. And really our network of networks here, and all of the insights that Dawn shared earlier about the value of that sharing we saw as really important. And then the strategies for mobilizing all 3 of those previous panels. So how do we actually facilitate peer-to-peer learning? How do decentralized emergency response efforts work best? And so these are sort of best practices that get shared through resources. But this doesn't really help you all as you're trying to do work and mobilize your network. So how do we take these insights into the types of information and resources and connections that are useful and turn that into the strategies that y'all can use? Next slide. So this is where that idea of where we saw observed challenges or needs from our partners in the times of disruption, then creating tools or frameworks to help guide action moving forward. So one thing we saw a lot of in the Resource Hub were that there were sort of scrambling ad hoc efforts to bring folks together in a particular community, let's say in a county or in a region, to say, how are we going to redistribute all of the fresh produce that's parking in our coolers right now because our school cafeterias have shut down, right? So communities that had those collaborative networks already existing were really able to move quickly and efficiently to support each other. But let's say you don't have that in place already. We have put together a guide of what we call our network response guidance and worksheet to help folks think through, who do we want to bring together? What sort of information should be shared? And really practical things like, where are we going to share the notes? Who's going to send out the Zoom link? How are we going to decide when to stop meeting? We saw lots and lots of bulleted lists of just a laundry list of potential federal programs that could fund things or other grants, right? But no support available on how to figure out which was the right fit. So we've pulled together things like webinars and write-ups with leaders on, oh, I'm on the wrong one, but we also did that. So we were creating a guide on how to think about the different types and sources of funding, from grassroots GoFundMe efforts to philanthropic support, state funding and federal funds, and where they fit best in response and recovery planning. We also saw that, as we had to do for ourselves, the formal emergency and disaster response systems are really robust and foreign to a lot of us So that's where we brought in extra partners. In the playbook, you'll find a really rich discussion between folks working at different levels of formal emergency response and how they understand the best ways to connect with and support local and regional food systems. And we've also done a lot of thinking, and I'm sure you all saw in your efforts too, the importance of emergency feeding and how local food systems can be a really invaluable piece there. So we've got some great thoughts on that. Okay, so those are just some examples of how we turned those things into action. Next slide. And really focusing on, yes, a lot of our learnings and our shared experience came out of the pandemic, but as we said, our climate crises, disruptions, and other longstanding structural inequalities continue to confront us as disruptions, and we saw it throughout our project. 2 of the partners that we interviewed from Puerto Rico were hit by that hurricane while in the midst of the project, right? So it's very real and present, and we really were struck by this quote that we need to call it what it is, human disaster, and talk about how we are prepared or not prepared in responding. So this is why the importance of thinking about different types of disruption informed our work. Next slide. And so I don't want to steal all the thunder here. My colleague Annalise has been invaluable in putting together. This is a sneak peek. It's not complete and live yet because we've got some polishing to do. But what does the actual playbook look like? Take it away, Annalise.
Yeah, thanks, Lillian. I'm so excited to finally be able to share a sneak peek of the playbook. So as Lillian mentioned, the tool is an online multimedia resource that includes everything from our new analyses to extensive case studies, interviews, videos, I think a podcast that we're putting together, planning tools, worksheets, and other very usable resources that all came to fruition through the development and creative process with our community partners. So we are really working to pair practical and actionable guidance and based on the experience from the on the ground actors. Next slide, please, Libby. So the playbook is divided into 3 main sections based on what we identify as the 3 key pillars of resilience that support LRFS in times of disruption. So these are equitable response and recovery, which really focuses on how communities coordinate the distribution of food, financial resources, and people power to address the most immediate needs in times of disruption, and also crucially plan for future recovery efforts. The second is securing supply chains, where we focus on building and safeguarding the physical and human infrastructure that keep locally raised foods fresh, accessible, and safe during times of disruption and beyond. And the third is maintaining markets. So a really key part of recovery that we learned during and after a disruption is finding ways to keep local foods moving through the marketplace. So this chapter really focuses on the creative solutions that we saw during COVID and climate disruptions about redirecting or repurposing food from different sectors that may or may not have worked together previously. So the playbook begins with our framework for what we're calling equitable resilience, and why we talk about equitable resilience as a process rather than just a stagnant definitive outcome. And a key component of our analysis was looking at the impacts and adaptations and actions that local food system sectors kind of responded to during COVID and climate disruptions. And this led to the development of an interactive diagram that talks about and reveals examples of these impacts and adaptations across different sectors. Next slide, please. So this is a little mock-up of this interactive diagram where each central piece of the pie represents different types of LRFS operations, networks, initiatives, etc. So for example, the direct-to-consumer subsector talks about operations that facilitate exchange and sales directly between producers and consumers. And this diagram really reflects the multidimensional and simultaneous nature of food systems during and responding to disruption by showing that each major subsector, which we're saying are both market channels and key government and non-governmental actors, so all of those are working together, exist simultaneously within the three key pillars that I just talked about. Next slide, please. So you'll be able to click on the inner slices of the pie, and what will pop up will be information that links to different case studies and videos and other web-based resources that shows impacts to that sector as it relates to the key piece of equitable resilience, and then examples of how resilience looked like in action. So you'll be able to click on that link and take it out to see that case study. And this really provides a quick overview of the breadth of examples and approaches that we explore in further depth throughout the diagram, throughout the playbook. Next slide, please. So this is just a sneak peek at the securing supply chains section, where there'll be the network planning tool that Lillian mentioned earlier, various case studies, and we just go really in depth about the three key pillars of resilience throughout the playbook. So that is what I have for you in terms of the sneak peek, but we'll have more shortly. So, and I think that's all for Resilient Playbook.
Thank you, Annalise. And again, continue to feel free to ask questions too as we move through these pieces really quickly. We definitely want this to be something where you also tell us where we can make more information available or answer any questions about how you might be able to use this within your networks. So I'm now going to move to sharing a piece about another part of this project, which was a consumer survey. Just as a quick overview, when we first started gathering communities of practice, what feels like forever ago now in the summer of 2020, one of the most common things we were hearing and listening in sessions with those folks is the changes they were seeing that were unprecedented, at least for them during their careers or work in the sector, and really wondering what was driving some of those changes, how long those changes might last, which ones might persist even after we were through the primary disruption of COVID. And so it motivated us to go ahead and do what was one consumer survey and became two consumer surveys in the falls of 2020 and 2021. And so beyond just giving you a couple glimpses into some of the things we've learned, want to highlight the fact that we have a series of fact sheets that continue to be added to on a monthly basis and will be continue to be added to for the next couple of months. And so if you go to the next slide, we'll give you a quick overview of what that information contains, how you might use it, and some of our future thoughts on working with that. So again, based on what our network felt like they needed to learn, we did do our first consumer survey in the fall of 2020. And what we tried to assess there is, although we knew it would be tricky for some folks, we had them try to go back and recall pre-COVID, which we called the fall of 2019, what their typical buying habits were compared to what happened at the very quick onset of COVID in April 2020, and then what they had kind of settled into by the fall of 2020. We know that's not an easy thing always for people to do, but we weren't asking about specific products. We were asking about where they shop. And at bare minimum, we think people have patterns there, and it shows up in their bank statements or their credit cards because of it being where they shop and a store name rather than having to recall how many bananas you ate. So we took that challenge on, and we felt like we got results that made a lot of sense and were really informative. That in fact, project was so well received that we were asked to do another follow-up survey last fall because things still really hadn't fully normalized. And so between those two surveys, we've come up with quite a portfolio of consumer food insights, again, not focused on how any household changed their purchase of any one product, but instead of how they changed where they shop, how they shop, and how that might align with what they might change about their buying behavior going forward. Next slide. So the other thing we did that might be somewhat distinct, and it's easy for us to understand, is we really disentangled food at home and those purchases that were made to be taken home, turned into meals, versus food away from home. And food away from home here very typically is characterized as restaurants, and it still is in our project. But we have to remember, this is when schools shut down, workplaces shut down, hospitals were very restricted. A lot of food that was consumed in cafeterias and things that aren't restaurants also, but food away from home, also changed markedly. We just knew as a project, if those meals weren't being eaten there, they were being eaten somewhere, and the food to make them was being purchased somewhere. So we gave a little more attention to both that delineation, plus food acquisition that's not a purchase. And this includes a lot of what happened with our food assistance programs, both through things like Feeding America and food pantries, but also the fact that a lot of schools really stepped up and made food available to their families, even when kids weren't coming to school, through various drop-off mechanisms. So we really try to disentangle a lot of pieces of the puzzle. Next slide. And our particular focus was really disaggregating markets, which isn't always something that happens. We have a lot of attention in this system paid to full selection markets, as you can see examples of below. And in fact, of our 5,000 people who answered the survey, the hypermajority of them, over 4,000, as you can see from the end, they do at least some of their shopping there. So they are still the dominant shopping mechanism, and they're great parts of our food system. But as we know, it's less common local and regional food system actors have access to selling through those stores, or at least they don't sell through those stores until they really ramp up into wholesale intermediated sales like our food hubs allow. What we wanted to give more attention to is some of these less typical limited selection, discount and convenience, local and regional markets, and seller-based limited selection programs like the food boxes that emanated during COVID and the meal kits that have been happening for a long time. So what we did, which was atypical for a survey, was really disentangle those market channels, because for this project and its stakeholders, that was really more important to them, is where food dollars were flowing through channels, and specifically those channels where it's more likely local and regional food system actors have access to those customers. Next slide. So for example, this is a data bite we presented earlier in this year. One of the big thrust of our initial findings was how many people did just change the way they went shopping. And so although 2/3, as you can see from the left-hand side, didn't do any new type of market, they stayed with the markets they were used to, 1/3 of the US population went and tried some new marketplaces. And when we think about the sheer buying dollars of 1/3 of this marketplace, that's significant. And you can see it was distributed across a lot of these different types of market channels I just mentioned before, and market channels that are more likely and commonly where our stakeholders are selling the products through. But as I said, we also try to give some attention to other food sources households were using, partly because food security was a big thrust of both what we wanted to learn about, but so many times it was local and regional food system players who are plugging in and being some of the backup and support to those new food boxes that were happening, or new purchases our pantries were making, because the volume of people coming to them was growing so much. Or we saw a huge increase in SNAP, which is our major food assistance program. And as many of you know, those double up programs have really proliferated across the country, and in fact, continue to grow to this day. So we also try to stay abreast of that, because even though it wasn't at the core mission of this project, we quickly realized food security was fully embedded in a lot of the decisions and transitions that our stakeholders were making out there. Next slide. So a couple of just snippets of things that we learned about shoppers during this is beyond where they were shopping. We also paid a lot of attention to some of their drivers, motivations, and values that were consistent across these shoppers who were going to our marketplaces, and some of them aren't surprising at all. It's not surprising to know people going to a farmer's market or CSA are being driven by locally grown or organic. Those are things that have been long-standing differentiators of those markets. But we really did see a ramp up of people wanting to support the local economy, and that showed up in all of these differentiated market channels. We for the first time asked and found out a lot of people found these markets were better for helping them to meet their cultural preferences, because as we've heard throughout this discussion today, this COVID event happened at the same time. We also had increased awareness for the diversity, equity, and inclusion we had throughout our food system. And then, of course, not surprisingly, some of our markets did feel more approachable for those people who felt COVID had affected their ability and access of where they could shop. So those were interesting lessons for us. We move to the next slide. We also asked those exact same things, but specifically the people who moved to online shopping, because online is one thing we've pretty much confirmed from these surveys might be one of the most persistent shocks that happened because of COVID. It was already happening. People were moving online pre-COVID, but it was a real tipping point and threshold where some people who'd been dabbling with the idea of going online fully bought into it because it was just the way to stay safest. And now that they're used to it and it's their new habit, we see a lot of evidence in our survey that'll persist. So we thought it was interesting to know more about that online group. And as you can see across all markets, even including the supermarkets, those people in online markets, not surprisingly, are younger. They have children and are educated. They actually tended to be male, although once you look at the large retailers, females were using those as much as males were. They tended to spend more at the food they were eating at home, so they're a little less price sensitive, and they were more likely to both have changed their habits and saying they're going to continue to persist with those changed habits. They did have higher COVID risk in their households in terms of someone in their household either having contracted COVID or had a health condition that would have made it problematic for them. And again, they're less concerned about affordability. So those price points, there's not a sensitivity to them that we see in other marketplaces. Specifically, if you look at some of the market categories that were of importance to our category, again, not surprisingly, locally grown and organic were really important to those folks who went online. They had a little more focus on their health, so maybe they could, it gave them a chance to actually peruse nutrition labels a little easier than standing in a store looking at labels. We also are finding online markets seem to be meeting their cultural preferences. They can find the types of food they want more easily, and they tended to be essential workers who were using those markets. That was actually a little surprising to us, but something that popped out of our results. And then, of course, meal kits and food boxes, sometimes which are local and regionally focused, sometimes or not, you see some of the very similar results. And so these are results we're trying to share with people so they think about how they can better target or meet the needs and values of the people who are shopping with their venues moving forward, and consider whether they have already and they want to ramp up that program, or if they want to start anew programs for online shopping. It looks like this is a new reality and a new growth segment for the food shopping category. Next slide. So moving forward, we're going to continue to post a few more of these consumer food insights. We have some great grad students working on this who continue to dig deep into the data. But we also know that there's interest in still understanding, and this is where that great data platform comes in, of whether it's this project's surveys or work you're all doing that you can share with us for the platform, understanding particularly these connections between the regional food sectors and food security programs. There continues to be innovations out of Washington, D.C. and each of our states and the Departments of Agriculture trying to integrate those programs and infrastructures in unique ways. Trying to look at, again, supply chains that service a regional markets and not just with a national and global orientation. And again, some of these more alternative markets we saw here that are independent grocers, cooperative grocers, our farmers markets, our food hubs, those are new places buyers turn to and seem to be staying with if we continue to give them a good value proposition. And what this really means is that there is a need for our community of practice. We are going to need very place-specific technical assistance because these dynamics are playing out very differently in different places. I didn't show a highlight from this, but when we even looked at these behaviors under the leadership of Jairus Rossi in rural areas versus urban areas, the dynamics for food shopping were very different across that continuum. Next slide. So with that, we kind of have wrapped up sharing with you some of the resources and pieces we hope your communities of practice can continue to gain from and use. But we wanted to turn this over to our partners at the United States Department of Agriculture Ag Marketing Service, who have been the key partner in this project and the supporters of it, to talk about how some of the things we've heard from today are also going to be very complementary to some new staffing and support services they're going to be offering as our governmental partners. So I'm going to turn it over to Samantha for her to give you that overview and highlight.
Awesome. Thanks, Dawn. Yeah, just want to first say that we really appreciate all the partners that came forward and helped us with this project in its entirety for the last couple of years. It's been great to work with the university partners, but then also the organizations that were brought on as part of the communities of practice, coordinating organizations and other stakeholders that participated in listening sessions and focus groups. It was really a great way to learn and create this new dynamic between all the different actors in the local regional food space. And I'll go a little bit more into that later, but you heard AMS mentioned a bunch of times, and you heard our crew mentioned a bunch of times. You may also have heard about these new regional food business centers. And there's also been a lot of job opportunities announced within our group. So I had gotten some requests from people saying, what does your division look like now? What is the structure? What's happening? What's going on? It's kind of a great thing that's happened partially as a result of the work that we've been doing in this local regional food space, and people realizing that the local regional food system is really responsive in these times of disruption, as was mentioned in the resilience playbook that Lillian was talking about, the data warehouse, really everything that this whole project has been going forward. Over the last couple of years, that has led to more investment in the local regional foods division. We were prior to this, the marketing services division, so got to get our rebrand, our rename in, and then a lot of different funding and grant opportunities going through our grants division as well. So just trying to give you a lay of the land of kind of the organizational structure of our division. So we have our local and regional foods division. It used to be just one big, kind of small actually, group of people together in one division. We've expanded since then and brought on a lot more individuals to join our team, which led us to branching into 3 different branches. So we have our research branch, which has a couple of economists, a couple of ag marketing specialists, and a management program analyst. They're doing the primary research related to the types of cooperative research agreements we've been doing in the past. So that branch is the most like what you've kind of seen from our division before, really focusing in on that cooperative research agreement discussion. The Regional Food Business Center branch, that has a group of ag marketing specialists. Currently, it has just Kate Fitzgerald, who's leading at the branch, and 1 ag marketing specialist and another one to start next week. But that team's going to get a lot bigger once those regional food business centers are chosen, because we'll be hiring people that will be kind of the liaisons and the connectors between the centers and AMS and the USDA as a whole. So that branch is really being built out. It's a brand new branch. And then we have the Outreach and Technical Assistance branch, which is part of the group that I'm in and that I work with. And Annalise, who spoke today, is also in that group. So the Outreach and Technical Assistance branch, their primary purpose is to work with both of the other branches. So you're working with the research branch. These types of cooperative agreements that we've talked about today, the Outreach and TA branch kind of works with them, figures out, hey, what are the best formats for this to be into? That resilience playbook. The data was really interesting and wonderful. How do we make it so that it's actionable learnings for the practitioners we're trying to serve? Really working together as a team to not only just to conduct research, which is extremely valuable and vital to our education and our growth and the development of local regional food systems, but how do we get it out to the people, and how do we get it out to the people in the forms that they need it best? So that's what the Outreach and Technical Assistance branch is kind of shaped with, and also providing that outreach and technical assistance to the regional food business centers once they are established. So being that kind of subject matter expert for them as needed, doing trainings, workshops. We're not exactly sure how it's going to work because, again, this is also a brand new branch, but really excited to see what we can create from there. So within that branch, we have a group of architects that offer no-cost facility design assistance, farmers markets, food hubs, shared kitchens, seafood processing, you name it. Fantastic group of architects. We also have ag marketing specialists and management and program analysts. Next slide, please. So you can see that same kind of breakdown. These are the names behind it. Ken Keck, who you probably have seen before, is our director. He will be sadly departing us and retiring and going to Florida to farm the land and save the heron population because he's growing products for them to eat. And that's a delightful retirement plan that I hope to, in the future, come up with something just as fun to go into. Christina Canal will soon go into that position. She's our current deputy director. And then we have Casey O'Brien as a detail. You can see everyone else on the teams out here. Cameron recently joined our team. He's the branch chief for the research branch. Kate Fitzgerald, as I mentioned, is running the regional food business centers. I'm over in outreach and TA. And then you have probably seen the names below. Carl, Julie, Abby. Abby's been great with the data warehouse and helping out with this project. And then you've probably also seen clearly Annalise and maybe some other people on this project as well. So really excited for the expansion and for what we're going to be able to create. Next slide, please. And this is just a quick highlight to just show our grants division is also expanding. On this does not include the regional food business centers, which is also another program that we're doing. It's a cooperative agreement and not a grant, but you can see that the grants division is expanding. New programs are being established through different funding mechanisms, and we're just excited to expand and be supporting the local regional food system and be getting the opportunities to do so. Next slide, please. And so overall, just wanted to do a quick reflection on this project as a whole for us. It was newer, you know, a couple of years ago when we were just the kind of the research branch before this whole structure of university partners and organizations and USDA on equal playing field, doing listening sessions and focus groups and interacting with stakeholders, paying stipends, paying people for their time, doing quick hit innovation briefs and that kind of stuff. It was a new concept to us. And we're grateful for our partners for all the cool ideas they came up with. And it's kind of almost helped us to transform into what this new division is going to be because of it, and because all the learnings that we had from this experience in this project and the partnerships that we were able to bring and the relationships where it wasn't as much of a USDA talking to stakeholders or stakeholders giving feedback only to USDA, but this really like co-creation of things. And wanting to work forward in the future with our division and the research that we do and the outreach and TA that we do with that same frame in mind of how do we have those regular touch points with people? How do we get from outside of our computer and really have the knowledge of what people need and the forms that they need? We heard multiple times during listening sessions that people don't want another 20-page report or manual, just like make a video on how I can create a hand washing station at my farmer's market. Like, thank you for all that you do. I just want a one-pager and an IKEA like furniture, how to make the furniture kit, or a delightful video that Lillian can do the voiceover for. And so really needing to get out there and learn about that has been a great opportunity for us that we hope to continue in the future. And with that, we want to open it up to questions and conversations from you all, feedback, anything you want to talk about or put forward. If there's projects that are similar to what we presented today that you have, share them in the chat, share them out. Yeah, happy to learn, happy to share, happy to do whatever. So I guess all the panelists can be on call now for stuff.
Thank you, Samantha, and I'll watch for hands, but if people also just want to unmute and speak up, you're welcome to ask questions or type any questions or clarifications you need in the chat box. I know we're coming up on the hour and some of you might have to leave us, but we'll stay as long as people are here with questions. And thanks for coming, Ellie. Any questions? I think we try to capture in the chat box links to any resource we were talking about, including that new data platform. The resiliency playbook isn't quite up yet, but it will be at the same site. We have some of these other links too. And then the consumer food insights. So those are available for anybody to use however they see fit. And we will send out a summary of this webinar with those links embedded in it in case you aren't sitting there capturing them and throwing them into a file somewhere. Any questions? Quietest group we've had this year. So I guess I do have one question for the data platform, and that's, we kind of gave the link out today, but we don't have it super easy to find publicly. Do you guys have a plan for when it's going to get its full rollout, and or do you feel like right now it's completely functional and ready for people to use as it stands?
I think that's an Ashley Chaffetz question, or maybe not an Ashley Chaffetz now because of the jobs shift. Sam, do you want to take that?
Yeah, thanks,
Or-
Don. No, yeah. It's in a place where we're still soliciting feedback. It's not in a pilot phase. It's up, it's running, it's usable. We want to get feedback still from people. We are in the midst of setting up a meeting with our undersecretary to kind of debrief them on it and showcase the good work, because we want to do, you know, a splashy release, but need them to help splash it, make the splash. So we're in that kind of phase. It's not totally publicly announced quite yet, though you can find it from that search bar. But yeah, looking to do a bigger kind of push for it in the near future.
And so, Becca, you guys made a really nice invitation to folks about both being able to partner alongside you and embed data any of our partners compile for the projects and so forth. Will there be like an intake form? Is it something where people just should reach out to you all? What's the best way for people to come alongside the data platform, since that's the one resource that feels like it's going to continue to be organic and change and grow as people propose data to move into it?
So I think a few things. One is we're going to make sure that there's a lot of information on the website about how to engage. Two is that we're trying to go to more conferences to meet with more folks. So for example, submitted some proposals to be at the FINE conference, Farm to Institution New England, and we're going to try to think through where are appropriate convenings to try to get some of that information. And then I think that to some extent, it's going to be based on specific opportunities as they arise. So as an example, I learned so much through this project. Really, I'm so grateful because one of the questions I had at the beginning is, why does the tech industry, want to engage in this, right? Why do they really care about like the local and regional food data? And this all.
Oh, you froze up, Becca.
All came up because Ashley Chaffetz project. Can you all hear me still?
Now we
Sorry,
can.
I froze there for a second. Okay. They had an opportunity to engage with the COIL project, but this is this thing happening with Census to try to make federal data more accessible to the public. So COIL was having success in engaging the tech industry, and we thought, why? Well, it turns out that one, the tech industry, much of what they're trying to do or work with is proprietary, and so they need some examples using public data, and so which is just really cool. And two, many of those firms, those companies actually have a requirement to do some sort of pro bono work. So my hope is that we find some opportunities to engage with some of those groups. And as those opportunities come up, then we have a really specific call that can go out through ComFood, or it can go out through the AMS listserv or these other local food listservs and say, who has a challenge that they want the tech industry to find a data solution to? And I think I'm really hopeful that those will emerge.
Great, thanks for those examples. And the link Libby shared is the best way for people to connect with you guys as a team if they want to get involved. Great.
Yeah, the recommendations one, yeah, not the FINE. What? Oh, that Tanya shared the.
Okay, if there's, people don't need to keep hearing me ask my questions. I know how to find all these folks, but does anyone else have any questions or comments before we wrap up for today? We're scheduled through 11:30, but we're happy to give people part of their day back. I know it's a busy time of year. We're thrilled to see this many people come, given how busy folks are. And although this series, again, is probably wrapping up, we hope through either the use of these resources or us getting back to normal and having some of our food system conferences reconvene, we hope to see you all in different places throughout the coming days. And please do not be shy about reaching out to anybody you've gotten to know through this project to ask questions about the use of these resources, even when they kind of become more static and are there on our website to use, because we hope they have a purpose for our community practice. And again, just great thanks to all the partners on this project, but particularly USDA Ag Marketing Service for having the vision and fortitude to give us the resources to do this right and well, and to embed so many partners in it. That makes it a little bit harder and gnarlier and a larger set of resources, but there's no way we would have learned or done what we were able to do in this without the wide circle of people you've all heard we had chiming in on this project. So I know, at least for me, it's been one of my more rewarding projects of my career because of that, and was very co-creative in spirit. So thank you for everybody involved. Thanks for everybody who's attended these and made us feel like our work is useful for what you're doing in your pockets of the country. And we're excited to see what continues to happen in local and regional food systems, particularly with this elevated support from our federal partners, and even at least in our state, Colorado state partners, as the federal government even flows some new monies of block grants down to them. So we hope you're seeing that in your neighborhood too. And if not, don't be shy about asking if we can do stuff to help you support your network wherever you're working. Otherwise, we'll sign off for today, and thanks everyone for coming.